listening to Resist and Restore, a podcast from the Circle of Hope Pastors, where we're extending the table of our dialogue. I'm Jonny Rashid. I use he, him pronouns.
I'm Rachel Sensenig, she, her.
I'm Julie Hoke, she, her.
When I did the intro, I smile real big. They can't see that I am. But it's because I'm happy. And I like talking to y'all, and I think we all do. They're all smiling. Julie and Rachel have big smiles on their face. We still do this on Zoom because we like Zoom. Even though we could hang out if we felt like it, but I just want to share my smile with you this way. Y'all doing okay too?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it translates in your voice. When you smile, your voice changes.
So you can you know when someone's smiling?
They can hear your smile.
Oh, that's interesting. I've never thought about that. Well, let's have some fun. This show's going to be good. I'm talking to my friend Bryant. Bryant's one of our leaders in Circle of Hope. He's applying to PhD programs, and he's working on... A few weeks ago, we had Jordan Burge on talking about becoming human. Bryant's working on becoming human and figuring out how his own race, he's a white guy, can stunt how we become human. So I think he's putting some good work, and I think he has something novel to say. So I hope that conversation is interesting to you and also encouraging and applicable. But let's start with Talkback. We end our Sunday meetings with Talkback. So if you haven't had a chance to come to a Sunday meeting, Rachel will give a message, and then she'll say something like, where are you here in the spirit? Or something like that. And then people will respond to her with their thoughts and ideas. Is that right, Rach?
Mm-hmm. It's my favorite part of every meeting.
We're in a dialogue. It's important. We got something to say, sure, but we believe you do too. And we value that. But here's something someone said. You blow out when you whistle. We were talking about whistling at the end of the episode. We're all suck in people. We all suck in. And I thought sucking in is how you whistle. I've never even seen someone blow out. And then this one of our listeners said, you blow out when you whistle. That is all. And that was the whole email to me.
That is all. I agree with this person.
Yeah.
So is that it?
Yeah, it's an exhale. Yes. We're just doing it wrong. But I think they're right. The whole idea of whistling is you're exhaling a tune.
I think the best whistlers probably blow out and suck in.
Probably.
Because then you could whistle in perpetuity because you're breathing.
Continuous, yes.
I think that's what we should work on. So we should learn how to blow out.
I have done zero research about this, but I am very curious. Like, nobody taught us to whistle sucking in. So, like, why do some people do it like that and other people do it the other way?
I don't know. How do you even learn how to do it? How did you learn how to whistle?
I don't know, but I was trying to teach my son this week after our conversation the last time, and he automatically sucked in to do it. And he got a little bit of, whistle going. But I didn't tell him to do that.
It might be, I have no idea, but it might be related to like the particular shape of people's mouths, and I don't know. I'm just thinking of like embouchure. Like, I was a French horn player in high school. Like, there's a lot that goes in. It's called your embouchure, like how you shape your lips and
embouchure.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah.
Johnny's interested in the word. I'm interested in the fact that you played the French horn. I never knew that about you.
Yep.
Do you have a French horn?
I don't. But I think it's one of the most difficult brass instruments to play. At least the concert horn is, because of the embouchure changing, like almost making insignificant changes in like your lips and cheeks and jaw and tongue, like is how you change the note.
Wow.
I'm also thinking of nursing babies and how that's such a, like, getting babies to latch is such a an art and a science.
Do babies have embouchure?
Yeah, babies have an embouchure, yeah. They have to get the right one so they can get fed.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Any other talkback, Johnny? We've kept this going for a long time. That
I like
one
the whistling.
sentence.
If you have any comments on whistling and how you do it, email us at resistandrestorepodcast@circleofhope.net. This talkback's a little bit more serious.
Oh, good.
I was
more.
listening to Resist and Restore this week and was struck by the comment that all people on any side of things can coerce and force things. It struck me out because it brought to the forefront of my mind the comment made after Charlottesville. There was a Charlottesville protest 2017, I think, 18, where Donald Trump said something like, find people on both sides. This person didn't say that. I'm just offering some context. So this person saying, I also disagree with the characterization of Jesus shared in that thought because Jesus is always on the side of the oppressed and doesn't play the middleman. He flipped tables in the temple to protest those with power taking advantage of the poor. So this person saying Jesus does take a side and does so with the oppressed. And how do we respond to that? Because the comment that they're talking about is like the idea that coercion can happen on all sides, and let's just react to that. You know, I think there's truth in what we said, and also what this person's talking back to. You know, this is how it would work at a Sunday meeting, right? Mm-hmm. You say your thing, and then someone talks back. So, what do you think, Julie and Rachel?
I think it's a good question. I mean, we often reference this Jesus flipping tables in the temple, and I think there's an element of religious power here that we don't always bring to light. It wasn't just like an economic sin or a class issue. It was the religious leaders oppressing people with their this is the right way to do it. This is how you have to get to God. And Jesus was resisting that too. No, it's through me. I am the temple in person right here. It's through me you can get to God. You don't need all this. You don't need all these religious rules. So I'm just complicating the question, I think.
Yeah, one of the issues was you could only use a certain currency in the temple, and you had these people coming from all over the region, and they would offer a higher exchange rate outside of the temple because you couldn't bring a coin with Caesar on it to the temple because that would be a sin to do that, you know. And so they'd have a higher exchange rate so you could get your things that you're going to sacrifice and then bring them in. So it was definitely an exploitative relationship based on religion, based on ethnicity, nationality. So all sorts of things are happening there that Jesus is disrupting rather forcefully. What do you think, Julie?
The disruption, the use of the word disruption strikes me, Johnny, that Jesus is disrupting the ways of the world all the time in order to reveal a kingdom that is not of this world. Like the kingdom that Jesus was inaugurating through his very self.
That's right.
Was a totally different way. And so I think that now I forget what the commenter was first speaking about.
That there's coercion on all sides of things.
Coercion.
And
Yeah. So Jesus is definitely interrupting all the ways that human beings use and abuse power and demonstrating through himself that a new kind of rule, the rule of love that was embodied in him. So, yeah, we definitely twist and distort things all the time. And it's possible to I was going to say get it wrong, but I don't know if it's about getting it wrong or getting it right. I think that what Jesus is doing is showing us another way. And that is constantly demonstrated in disrupting the ways that people operate to reveal a new way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think that new way, when Jesus says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit," I think there's really something to that about he's calling us to know our need. He knows our need. I'm thinking of that Christmas song too now. But to know that we need him to make this way, that he is the way. So I think that's like an equalizer for all of humanity. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for they will see God.
He knows our need. Our weakness is no stranger.
Mm-hmm.
Can I add a little bit to this, y'all?
Mm-hmm.
Please, because I think you're writing a whole book about it.
I'm editing a book about it now.
Yes.
Yeah. She's talking about Jesus Takes a Side. It comes out May 31st, 2020. Pre-order it through Herald Press or an independent bookstore if you can. But if you just want to use Jeff Bezos, that's okay. A lot of people do that. And that's also how book sales happen. So, don't get all in your head about not using Amazon. Okay, I'm now transitioning to what I want to say, which was not talking about the book, but to say that nonviolent Christians like us, we're part of the Anabaptist tradition, we're nonviolent, and so we're sensitive to coercion, which is using force to compel someone to change. We think only the love of Christ should compel you. But as I look at examples of nonviolent leaders and how they affected change, oftentimes their tactics were called coercive. So like Martin Luther King was called a rabble-rouser. People thought he was indifferent to riots. People thought that his non-resistance and his disruption was coercive, But when you're in nonviolent non-resistance, you're trying to create an uncomfortable situation for those in power, not using violence so that they change. And so there is a use of power. It's just not violent power. And I think that that's something that we just have to keep grappling with. What do we do when our love of the poor and the oppressed makes someone uncomfortable or feels impolite or feels harsh? Is that coercion? And let's actually have a discussion about that, because I think sometimes those who are resistant to change or those who the change affects the most feel like oppressed when the power dynamic is changing in the relationship, Like when the rich young ruler talks to Jesus in Luke 18 and he walks away discouraged. He feels badly. And his disciples respond and say, "Who then can be saved?" They're also discouraged because they're not sure anybody can make it. And so I don't think Jesus was acting in a coercive way, even though his response was that, I don't think Mary is acting that way when she sings, he brings the mighty down from their thrones. He sends the rich away empty. The incarnation of Jesus is a significant political circumstance that changes how we relate. And for the poor, for the oppressed, the yoke is easy, the burden is light. For the self-emptied. That's why Mary could be filled with good things, because she was empty as it is. She didn't even self-empty. She was just lowly. She was just oppressed. And then for other people, it will be like a camel going through the eye of a needle. It will be like a straight and narrow path. It'll be difficult. So I just want to hold that complexity and know that Jesus meets us exactly where we're at, and helps us along the way. And we're not all at the same place. Mm-hmm. Salvation uniquely expresses itself to us.
Right. But the invitation is for everyone.
Absolutely.
I think Jesus is saying, "Come and be poor with me, everyone. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Know that I am your way, and that you need me."
That's right. So it is an invitation for everybody. Everybody is invited to the table. Absolutely. And the cost will be different for some, and the result will be different for others, It's like that parable of the banquet, right? Where everyone gets invited, and the people that are too full can't make it to the banquet.
Mm-hmm.
And he finds the people that are available. So we're availing ourselves to God and God's movement. And of course, it's better to voluntarily submit that stuff. But sometimes someone will ask you to, and it might be a hard ask. And I think we're down with that.
And I think you're right, Jonny, that in movements of change throughout history, whenever the movers are like bringing things a little right or left of center, the temptation for those maintaining the status quo is to like throw the whole thing out, because it's not, it's going too far in one direction. It's not doing it the right way. And I understand that temptation, but Jesus is upending. He's upending the status quo of self-reliance and calling us to find our life in Him, all of us.
Totally. So it is a beautiful invitation. I hope you can sit at the table with all of us. We're all learning how to do it. And we're with you in the pain and the discomfort. When it doesn't feel so good to carry your cross and follow Jesus. But we also hope it's liberating for you too. Again, talk back to us at Resist and Restore Podcast at circleofhope.net. We really want to hear from you. Even if it's about whistling. And also, I want to hear from the suck-in people. I'm interested to hear from you. I still believe that it could be right. So if you suck in, please email us. Thanks again for listening to our podcast. So happy to have a relationship with you and build a community with you. If you want to keep doing that, if you want to keep extending the table of our dialogue, a few ways you can do that is by liking this podcast, leaving a review for us, a high review, and tell us why you like it, and then share it with people that you think would be moved by what we're sharing or be blessed by it too. So like, subscribe, and share. And also share money with us. Go to circleofhope.church and you can find a way to give money with us. That helps this podcast, but it also helps the whole church out. And while you're there, check out cells and Sunday meetings. Look at our daily prayer. There's lots of ways for you to connect, whether you're in the Philadelphia metro or around the world or around the country. We still want to connect with you and have a relationship. Thanks again for listening. So welcome, Brian, to Resist and Restore. Bryant Burkhart's here. He's my homie. He's been my friend for a long time. We've served alongside of each other in Circle of Hope in many capacities. He's a seminary student, and he's applying to PhD programs now. And I brought him on just to bring some of his insight about some of the work he's doing. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing in seminary and what you hope to do in your PhD work? What are you studying? What are you into?
Sure. Thanks, Jonny. It's good to be here.
Glad to have you.
Yeah, been friends for a long time. It's good to spend some time with you, even if it is on Zoom that hates us.
It took us a long time to work this out.
Yeah. So I have been at Claremont School of Theology for 2.5 years now. Started as process studies focus, which is it's some deep philosophy metaphysics that takes a while to explain, and but really, what it ends up, what a lot of my work focuses on is trying to explore the interaction between whiteness and the church, and trying to figure out ways that we can, as white people, grow from and build new understandings of our faith based upon the work that contextual theologians have done before us. Leading people like Black theologians, feminist theologians, stuff like that. So building on their work, but really trying to contextually work out what it means to be a person of privilege as someone who's a white man in light of the work that they're doing.
So can you explain explain a little bit more about what process is and what process theology is?
Yeah, sure. It's based upon the thoughts of this British philosopher, Alfred North Whitehead. He wanted to try and bridge the gap between what is often two kind of conflicting approaches to philosophy. There's you got one half of people who are kind of like we are individual minds in bodies, and we're kind of working out the world. We use logic and reason, and that's the best way to work out the world. That's kind of what you might call a conventionally Western approach, where the atomized individual is the smallest act of all reality. And for process people, they want to actually look at the processes and the things that make up reality. So for Whitehead, instead of we are made of atoms and stuff, but we're the relationship between atoms is what actually constitutes us. So I think a good in the physics realm, a lot of people turn to quantum metaphysics because we're talking about, or quantum physics, because we talk about how it's the relationship between electrons and the space between them that holds us together. So it's the bond between them that is actually the thing that constitutes us. And so that translates up in bigger and bigger scales, because we are made up of the relationships that we have to the people around us, to the globe around us, and to the world around us. So we're trying to move away from that individualized perspective of the world and towards something that acknowledges the ways that we are tied to one another.
Can you relate that then, the ways that we're tied to one another and to God through our relationships, through our connection to the environment around us, to one another? How does that relate with race and maybe even a bigger idea, whiteness? And maybe you want to define whiteness first.
Sure. Actually, defining whiteness first is going to help, because
okay, go ahead.
Jonny and I were talking before this episode, and I was thinking, and he sent me this question, and the first question is, what is whiteness? And I just started laughing, because it is such a big and complicated topic. Could easily, I've read a dozen books on it in the past year, and I still don't have an answer. But whiteness, one scholar, Willie James Jennings, talks about it as he calls it an aesthetic regime. Mm-hmm. A lot of people, scientists, sociologists, scholars, academics have done all this work trying to understand what race is. A really good work that I've been reading is by Noah Irvin Planter. I think it's called What is Whiteness? And she does a really good job. It's 400 pages. She does a really good job of exploring the way that the identity of being white and of race in general is historically constructed. It never means the same things at 2 points in time, and it's always developing and changing. So what Jennings, with his idea of the aesthetic regime, is talking about is this sense that whiteness is, in a sense, a lie. It's not something that's grounded in reality. We have different phenotypical characteristics. We might have different skin color. We might have different nose shapes, eye shapes. But genetically, scientifically, DNA-wise, we are made of the same stuff. We're all human beings. There's not really like a scientific, quote unquote, divide between different races. And all of the things that we associate with whiteness have developed more or less in the past 400 years. And that's why I like what Jennings is talking about with the aesthetic regime, because at the heart, we have this notion where to have white skin is to be good. It is to be the center of what we want from a human being. And then out of that, we develop this idea that not only is our skin and our phenotypes reflective of what's inside us, but then as Christians particularly, we take that to the next level and we say that makes us holy. So I like to talk about it as a movement to ontology and then to sacramentality. So white skin becomes what is identified with goodness, purity, holiness, and godliness. And I think that right there, that process is really, really deadly, because we are moving away from the diverse humanity of God, and we're grounding our understanding of reality in something that is so benign and arbitrary as our skin color or race. So to bring it back to what we were talking about with process thought, I appreciate process thought because it takes me not only out of my head and out of my logic and out of my intellect. It helps me ground my understanding of reality in my body and what I'm doing and what I'm feeling. But also by speaking to people around me, speaking to people of color, speaking to my family members in the church, I am able to learn more about reality through that relationship, through that relationality. I am opened up to the greater reality of the world. And that's really complicated a lot of times for white people, because we end up realizing that sometimes our feelings, our logic, our intuition, they're not exactly trustworthy. They've been shaped by our understanding of what is good and true and beautiful, that itself has been shaped by whiteness. Does that make sense? That was a rambling answer, but...
So let me ask you this. That's a good answer. What does whiteness do to white folks? What does it do to people of color? How am I, as a brown man, affected by whiteness?
Yeah. So I think on one sense, whiteness blinds us to reality. That's something that I've really come away with. The sense that whiteness has is that it is correct and that it is universal. So I was thinking about this yesterday, and I was thinking about the ways that normality and what is normal and what is expected often end up shaping our relationship with ourselves and the world around us. So I remember I was in, I think, like 9th grade, and I went to King's Dominion for the first time. And I had this realization. Again, I was in 9th grade. I was like 13 years old. Nope, 15 years old. I had this realization that I was not the racial norm. And it wasn't bad. Not to defend my past self, but I remember thinking like, oh, this is weird. This is not an experience that I'm used to. Where I looked around, and it was, because King's Dominion is near DC, lots of folks of color, lots of families hanging out. It was a really great experience, but it wasn't, it was just like, it was one of those clarity moments where the veil drops away and you realize like, oh, my entire life I've been thinking of myself as normal. And right. That's like, for white people, I think that those realizations come really late and they're really hard to overcome. And I think we have a lot of these small realizations that we shovel under the rug. I was thinking about, forgive me for referencing Harry Potter, but I was thinking about the cloak of invisibility. And I think that in ways, that's what whiteness does to our understanding of race and ourselves for white people, is we're able to put on this cloak and just blend in with the crowd, whether that is a literal crowd, like from Lancaster, my hometown,
yeah, totally.
Or that is a more metaphorical crowd where we're talking about representation in media and stuff like that, where we grow up with this subtle understanding that we are the norm and we are what is expected to represent that norm. And that's really, I think from my conversations with BIPOC folk, that's really hard, because that sense of being other, that sense of being not normal or not the norm, is really corrosive to a sense of self. So yeah, that's what I get from talking to different people. Like that awareness, that like realization when I was in 9th grade, that's something that happens so much younger when you're a person of color. And that's just such a small scale example, but yeah.
So like, I've definitely experienced that. I've definitely assimilated myself towards whiteness and tried to achieve it. And it's been a complicated journey for me as an immigrant, because I know that to make it, I needed to be that way. And we didn't even know what was happening to us when my parents immigrated. We thought we were supposed to become like Americans. And we totally conflated whiteness and Americans like they were the same thing, right? We thought that's what we were supposed to become. And it's proven for me kind of devastating to realize that I was even like ashamed of my heritage and my culture because it didn't work out in this way. We had to act American, I remember my sister code switching, and I was wondering like, what's going on here? Why are you acting differently here than you are at home? That sort of assimilation towards whiteness is actually white supremacy. A lot of white Christians, Brian, are not going to say, I think white people are better than everyone else, or more holy than someone else. They can't even perceive whiteness, and the distinction you made in the beginning between like your literal skin color and then what that means is something that a lot of white people can't figure out. What do you do to somebody? How do you talk to somebody who can't connect these two ideas?
Yeah, I think that's really hard. That's a lot of why I've been going down the journey of my master's thesis, is trying to figure that out, and that's really difficult. I think going back to that cloak of invisibility I was talking about, something that we realize, something that whiteness makes us do subconsciously, is we start to, it's a lens through which we see reality. We start to filter out experiences that don't fit in to our whiteness. And I think a big part of it is we have to pick out those experiences and remind people that they had them, particularly white people. Because people of color, it's always there. You can't filter those out. But when you're the norm, when you're the expected norm in society, that's what you do naturally. So, yeah, like that story I told about King's Dominion, I hadn't thought about that since it happened.
Oh, wow.
It was like, it just came to me and I was like, this may be a false memory, but I definitely remember this happening and thinking this. Yeah, I think for a lot of people, watching the recent police killings of black men and women has been one of those things where that's poking at this kind of cloak of invisibility, like they're breaking through the veil of whiteness that we're seeing the world through, and we're being forced to realize that there is another reality beyond where we're at right now. So I think a big part of it is storytelling. At least I hope it is. That's a lot of my answers to it, having white people share their own stories of becoming aware of their racial nature, becoming aware of their own whiteness. I think for BIPOC folks, those who are able and who have worked through the trauma so it won't re-trigger them, sharing their stories of being racially othered, being hurt. I know that's a little tenuous because it's something we've talked about a lot. It is very vulnerable to share those stories. And so I want to honor that. But the people that have, I think those stories can help us can help the people or help their communities see what's going on. But yeah, there's ultimately like a theological question there of like, some people might call it a conversion question. Does God do it? Does God break that reality? Or is it something that God's already done and we just have to keep working till we get there? I don't know if it's as easy as that dichotomy, but.
So a lot of Christians who think that God has already done it believe that we can enter into kind of a post-racial society now. Right now, we can just start and say, race is a social construct, whiteness is invented, my white skin doesn't have any meaning. What are the problems with that approach? Let's just go there.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you brought that up because that's a big reason I wanted to start my research, is because it's not that easy. Back to what I said about Jennings and the aesthetic thing. Whiteness shapes what we view as good and beautiful and true to a point where we have a heart. We can't differentiate. We really are blinded to what reality might actually look like. There's a deep psychological impact. There was a very famous, I think it was Martinique philosopher, Frantz Fanon, who talks a lot about this in terms of colonization and race. He was a black philosopher, and psychoanalyst. He talks a lot about the ways that colonization shapes our minds in order to, for the colonized, they become envious and it makes them want to become like the colonizer. Yep. And for them, they have to break out of that cycle of being colonized. And it doesn't just require overthrowing the colonizer. It requires overthrowing the colonizer in their minds. And that also is true in whiteness. There is a colonizer in our minds that is calling us to present ourselves as normative, to present ourselves as the chosen ones. And when we move into this kind of narrative of a post-racial society, we're often doing that we are not addressing the colonizer in our minds. We're not addressing the ways in which our thoughts are still shaped by whiteness. And we're also not addressing a big part of that is we're not addressing the pain that still exists. So like for us as white people, it is about moving in time at times beyond that colonizer mindset. But it is also, I think, really important for the community that the pain is addressed. Something that I think our narratives of salvation often fail to tell us and fail to wrestle with. We want the cross to solve everything in the moment. Christ died and is raised again, and now trouble is no more. But I think the troubles in this world shape us and make us who we are. And I think to just move on and just say we're in a post-racial society is not going to fail to give comfort to the oppressed, but it's also, and it's not going to address the ways in which we're not in a post-racial society.
A lot of people think that racism is something that we invariably live with, though. I know a lot of Christians might jump to a post-racial society. We call it a new humanity and circle of hope. So, like, what do you tell to people who don't have hope for a post-racial society? I think this is one thing that, now we're going to get into something, one thing that people who throw around the term critical race theory sometimes will say, like, the inevitability of racism means that we're always going to have to be combating it and deconstructing it, and we can't even create a reality that doesn't address it. Is there any hope for a post-racial society? Is there any point for striving for one?
I think, is there any hope? I hope so. In our lifetime, I don't think so. But I don't think that's why we come together as a community of faith. Like, I don't think that we're grounded on the idea that Christ is coming back and the world's going to be made right, like in 2022. I think we turn to Christ, we turn to God, we turn to these stories of the faith because they help to create and to sustain that hope within us. I don't think this is a long journey. We have race was built as a construct over 400 years, and we're not just going to undo it through the power of positive thinking in 2 days. Like, we're on a long. I think it's going to take many, many, many more times that to undo that narrative, to undo the power of race in America. But I don't think that we need to not do it. Yeah, look, you were going to say something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, is there any, like, you as a white person, you enter into your white body and you have meaning. How have you meaningfully divested from it, or what do you hope? How do you hope to do that? Can an individual strive towards a post-racial society? And if so, how do they do that? How do you take a step to do that?
Yeah, I think that's really complicated. I think we have to work to decolonize our minds, to use that language from Fanon, but that doesn't change the fact that we still live in a racialized society. Mm-hmm. Whiteness, white privilege is a twofold aspect, one of which is it's internal. So it's the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. The other aspect is that it is given. It is something that other people perceive about you and they grant to you. So we can't necessarily control that. We can do our best to decolonize our minds, to deracialize our minds. We can do our best to control the ways that our brains think and try and develop in better directions. But I also think that if we are serious about this work, it's going to require action. It's going to require stepping into society and trying to decolonize society. And that's really difficult and scary. Yeah, I don't think you can't have one without the other. And so that happens in big ways, like working for a less racist legal system. And that happens in small ways, like white men realizing when they're taking up too much room, and trying to get other people to speak, creating space for new voices, creating spaces for new leaders. I think those are all part of the bigger picture, but I don't think they can be separated from each other.
What's interesting to me as a person of color is that to overcome whiteness, I've needed to become conscious of my racialized experience and how I've been ordered. And the same is true for white people. They need to become aware of their own whiteness and then let go of it. But for people of color to be liberated, we really need to feel how we've been racialized and how the racial hierarchy orders us. And I think that's harder. So I think we feel it in our pain. Mm-hmm. We feel it in our experience. We feel it in our shame. For white people, they have to realize that some of their power, some of their privilege, maybe even some of their wealth comes from their race. And that is hard to admit when whiteness itself structures society in a way that clouds that, cloaks that, as you said, right? So how do we have people coming to racial consciousness in order to be liberated and others coming to racial consciousness in order to shed it? How do those two work together? You know, a lot of white people will say, Jonny, you're making your race a problem. We have our identity in Christ now. There's neither Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female. We're all one in Christ. So why are you making your brown skin a problem? Without realizing their whiteness is why my brown skin is a problem. Like, how do you respond to that?
There's a lot there. So a few things. One, I think for white people, they also have to come to their terms with their feelings of race. I think a lot of times it's not a sense of coming to terms with feelings of pain, but it's a sense of feeling numbness or being aware in which the ways that we are suppressing feelings of uncomfortability or anger, or like the ways for progressive white people, the ways that we are suppressing racist thoughts within, realizing those and not acting upon them, but becoming aware that this whiteness is inculcated within you, not thinking of ourselves as the exception. But beyond that, I think you're hinting at something really critical. That is, there is contextuality in our ethics, if you will. So what is right and good for us to develop as people is different because we're different people. Right. So, so for white people, that work of becoming aware of their numbness, of their own internalized racism is important, but it's also, it's part of the picture. When people of color have to divest themselves of their own internalized racism, that it means to become aware of their own pain and to fight for liberation. And I think for white people, that fight for liberation is a big fancy theology word I use is canonic, which means that it is a sense of giving up. In theology, we talk about canonic love, which is the love that.
How do you spell canonic?
Canonic, Kenotic, or kenosis is the Greek word, and now I can't remember what it means. I think it means to enter in.
It's what Jesus does when he lets go of his divine nature.
Yeah, we talked about it in Jordan's episode a couple weeks ago.
Kenosis means self-emptying.
Yes, thank you.
Philippians 2 talks about this. It's Paul's quoting a hymn about how Jesus didn't consider himself to be on the same level as God, with God. So he let go. Self-emptying is what kenosis means.
To get really theological, and I love getting theological, that act of God, of becoming Christ, tells us something essential about God. It tells us who God is. And so when God enters into the world and self-empties of God's own power, I think God models what it's like for people of privilege. Today we're talking about whiteness, but I'm also talking about masculinity, about heterosexist people, or about heterosexual people, cisgendered people, able-bodied people. They have been given this power, and also they have absorbed this sense of privilege within, and to surrender that and give that up is a part of our ethical call. And I think for people that have been oppressed, a sense of liberation is, I had a professor who called it kenosis in action. So it's a surrender of power liberates others because, as Isaiah says, every mountain is laid low and every valley is filled in. There is a coming together. There is an equalization that happens in that.
So by self-emptying, we become more human, whether it's self-emptying whiteness, patriarchy, heteronormativity. I'm reminded, as we're in Advent, so in the week of Mary, as we observe in Circle of Hope, and so I'm reminded of that Mary came empty in order to be filled. And so for oppressed people, we don't need to further self-empty, right? This can be weaponized against women specifically, but also other minorities, that you have to self-empty, and when you claim your dignity, you're not doing that. We come and empty, and our dignity that we're claiming comes from Jesus, comes from God, right? That's what's filling us up. So I want to note that, and I want to say that, in a sense, it seems like consciousness of our emptiness and being filled by God makes us more human. And that's the journey that white people are invited in on, to let go, to be filled up by God. Can you think of, and race is a modern social construct, but what are some examples of this divestment that you see in the Bible? I know we talked about Isaiah 40 a second ago and Philippians 2, but where do you see Jesus doing this? How do you think Paul's entering into it in the New Testament? Where do you see it in the Old? Anything come to mind, Bryant?
Yeah, I love that you mentioned Philippians 2. From a theological perspective, that's one of the oldest texts in the New Testament many scholars think it's one of the oldest texts in the New Testament. They think it's a hymn that the early church sang before things were written down, because the New Testament was written in 40 to 100 years after the death of Christ. So we have this song that this is the heart of what is at the middle of. This is what the heart of our faith is. People are singing this song about God becoming human and self-emptying. But I also think we see it in a lot of stories. I think we see it oftentimes in stories when Christ is interacting with people of power. Christ interacts in almost every gospel with the rich young ruler. There is a character that in one gospel he's rich, in another gospel he's young, in another gospel he's rich and young.
You wrote a whole paper about this.
Oh, I did. We just call him the rich young ruler, but the narrative is that Christ is asking him to self-empty. He's asking him to give away his money. He's asking him to give away his privilege and his power. And the guy walks away. The cost of discipleship is too great. He walks away in the story. Don't know what the rest of his life was like. I want to hold out some hope that he could eventually change his mind. But he walks away in the narrative, and we see the cost of discipleship. But then we also get that contrasted with Zacchaeus, who, more than just a wee little man in a tree, he gave away all of his money, and he gave away all of the wealth that he had. I don't know if stolen is the right word, but he definitely, in that time, to be a tax collector was to collect taxes, and then you took a little off the top for your family, and it was not illegal, but also not ethically great. And he gave back all that wealth plus some. And so we see these great stories repeatedly throughout the New Testament and throughout the Bible. I think there's, but I'll focus on the New Testament today, about that of people that are invited into giving up their wealth. It's often about wealth, giving up their land, giving up their power, and to join in Jesus, to become essentially wanderers at the beginning.
Yeah, the gospel seems to be full of messages of letting things go, of dropping your nets, of Jesus filling them, of empty vessels being filled with oil, right? These things that we come to God empty so that we can be filled. And that's what it's like to carry your cross, right?
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to say, I think a lot of times we want to make those purely spiritual or psychological, and I think those elements are really important. But I think that when we write out the literal and the material consequences, I think we're losing a big part of the gospel.
Totally. So I think that your work and your research is helping us to understand that whiteness interferes with our humanity, our relationship with God, our relationship with one another. Letting go of it helps us overcome it. We're all invited into that opportunity. Thanks, Bryant. Before we go, is there any way that we can talk to you, relate to you online? Anything you want to share? Instagram, Twitter, what is it?
I mean, you can reach out to me on social media. I check the DMs, but I don't often update. I think my Twitter is just my name, Bryant.Burkhart. You can just go to Jonny's Twitter and look for me. I'm there.
Yeah, maybe.
And
Bryant underscore Burkhart. I found him.
Oh, it's an underscore
in
now.
The show notes. Yeah, you should know that. Cool, Bryant. Thanks again for this. Really appreciate the talk. Good to talk to you.
Yeah, always.
We like to end our show with an exploration of what has been nourishing our souls. We call this Spiritual Show and Tell because it's about what's been inspiring us, what's been feeding us in not just actual food, but in a holistic life together kind of way. So, pastors, what's been nourishing your souls lately?
Did you know that there are some traditions that think that Mary, this is good talk for y'all, that Mary did not experience pain in labor? Now that sounds absurd, right?
That's the patriarchy.
And so there isn't, it's the Catholic tradition, and I love Catholics, and there's a lot of good stuff in that, but there's a lot of patriarchal reinforcement, and Anabaptists and evangelicals and other Christians are not immune from that just because we don't have a pope. Okay, so that's like a big disclaimer here before I keep going. But she's often not depicted in labor. Okay, so like this doesn't happen. But the Magnificat and the birthing of something new in the world actually feels painful. We were talking about coercion before, but we're going to feel the pain of something new being born in the world. And this is what nourishes my soul. It is called The Creation of Man by Gickly. I don't know this. I don't know the artist, but I think Gickly, Giclee. I just encountered this painting, and I'll link it in the show notes. And what I'm going to do is send it to you on the chat, and I want you to give me your reaction of it. It is a picture of Mary and Joseph, and they're white, so just let that be. I know we know. And they're alone, which is also a problem because they probably had a lot of people with them, and like women were around Mary in this moment. So it still gives you the classic nativity scene, so don't deconstruct it too much. I just want you to see it. And look at this image. Here's Mary giving birth to Jesus. It's in the chat, Rachel. We're on a chat. We have a chat program that we talk to each other all day about. But look at this image. Look at Mary giving birth. What do you think of that?
Wow.
Oh, you mean the Google chat?
Yeah,
Jonny.
the Google chat. You got it, Rachel. You'll find it.
Wow.
But yeah, she is in agony. Joseph's there holding the baby. The chicken's a little upset, but
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've seen this one. I love it.
I have never seen this.
I've never even seen something like it. So I saw it. This was pretty incredible. And so this painting is nourishing my soul and encouraging me to know that the incarnation, the arrival of Jesus, whether in first century Palestine or 21st century Philadelphia, will be painful. Like, she is in agony, right, giving birth, but she also magnifies and glorifies the Lord for looking upon her with favor. Like, that, holding both of those things together in this moment is really encouraging to me, especially as we do anti-racist work in Circle of Hope that is painful for BIPOC and also for white people. So that's what's nourishing my soul.
Thanks for sharing that, Jonny. What's nourishing my soul was also shared with me this week. My friend Iboro shared this meditation from Richard Rohr on the crucified God. It's a dialogue with the crucified God that Richard Rohr wrote, and I read through it and was moved And then in my cell meeting this week, our conversation just naturally led to this reflection again. And he shared it again, and we listened to it together, and then reflected on what was resonating with us, what stood out. And so both this actual writing and the process of him sharing it and why it was so significant for him, and then talking about it together in community, that whole experience nourished my soul. So I will share this meditation. It's long. I won't read it to you all right now, but I'll put it in the show notes, and with the encouragement to get connected to a cell, because that was a big part of what nourished me, was him sharing how God is speaking to him right now, and what the way that the Spirit moved in him through this meditation moved me too. So I'm grateful to be on the spiritual journey with a community of people, because it nourishes my life with God.
I've been nourished recently by Brené Brown's latest book called The Atlas of the Heart. A friend got it for me, and in that book she's naming some common human feelings and experiences, and kind of grouping them together in different ways. But it's just helping me to kind of name my own process of transformation and the different feelings along the way, because I'm still trained to kind of muscle through. And I relate to Brene personally too, because she also is the oldest of 4 children, kind of grew up in a volatile, wild family situation, and has learned to really slow down and kind of name what's going on, even in terms of her feelings. And so it's been lovely. And I'm grateful for her and her work. Thank you, pastors, for naming your feelings and experiences, your joys and sorrows. We are in a birthing process. We're in a process of transformation with Jesus, individually and as a community. And I'm grateful for you too. And for all who are connected to us. So thank you for listening, and please tune in again soon.